Welcome back to Making It Awkward. I'm your host, Jessica Wilson. A quick note to listeners, this episode will briefly mention weight changes and belt loop changes I experienced as part of my experiment. Today's episode will be the wrap-up of my month of eating 80% of my calories from ultra-processed foods, also known as UPFs, in September. I'll give a run-through of how my results stack up against the personal experience of someone who changed their diet as I did. Then I'll bring Amy Fletcher back to discuss the lessons I've learned about myself through the process and some discussions about class. To recap, the inspiration behind this was the wall-to-wall coverage of Dr. Chris Van Tulleken's personal experience of eating 80% of his calories from ultra-processed foods. The coverage was part of promoting his book, Ultra-Processed People, in which he details his experience. The publicity generated headlines like, "What happened when a doctor only ate ultra-processed foods for a month?" And even the New York Times came out with a quiz for identifying UPFs. News outlets were reporting Van Tulleken's experience as if it were a universal experience, and that anyone whose diet was high in UPFs would be tired, anxious, less productive at work, and gain weight as he did. Van Tulleken also hypothesized that the UPFs make us unable to be full. His story was told by journalists as if it were capital N news, not a book review, not an anecdote, but as if it were a research study and had universal application. So I wanted to try this to see if, one, it actually is a universal truth, and whether my experiment would get the same coverage if I don't have the clickbait experiences that he did. The rules I set out for myself were getting at least 80% of my calories from UPFs. I decided that the easiest way for me to do this was to only get 300 calories of unprocessed foods, because I certainly eat more than 1,500 calories a day. But I also didn't want to have anyone telling me I was lying about my math. I defined a UPF as a food that had 5 ingredients and at least 1 additive. I wrote down most of the foods I ate in a journal. I also kept track of my sleep, anxiety, happiness, hunger, and constipation on a 5-point scale for both August and September. Van Tulleken kept track of both his weight and his belt loops. He did a month of completely unprocessed foods prior to his UPF month and ended up losing weight. I ate my regular foods because that's reality and a better baseline comparison. In both my August and September, I had a couple of days with a seizure flare, and both months had days on which I was just more tired than others due to late nights or sleep disruption. I didn't specifically track my work productivity, something that Van Tulleken noted got worse as his month went on. Honestly, I didn't know how to track it and even how to measure it if I could. During my month, where Van Tulleken was more hungry, I was more full. I went longer periods between meals without realizing, and you'll hear from Amy that my food-related anxiety was significantly reduced. Noticing that I wasn't tired in the afternoon and wasn't drinking caffeine to make it to 5 p.m., or needing to take a nap in the afternoon to get through the rest of the day, both were certainly an indication that my productivity was improved. Regarding my mood, as I said in the last episode, when my spouse is able to notice that I'm less cranky and complaining less, I'm a very dramatic adult when it comes to adulting, is quite an objective change. Overall, my energy is up, and I had the desire to do an interval workout for the first time in all of 2023. My anxiety was unchanged, and I wasn't constipated, as Van Tulleken reported he was. I don't have belt loops to measure because I simply do not wear belts every day. What I do have is a dog leash that goes around my waist, which was previously a very snug fit. In the last month, a small but noticeable gap between my waist and the leash developed. In August, my weight went down 0.1 kilograms, and in September, it went up 0.3 kilograms. So between these 2 months, I'd say that my weight was unchanged and subject to what I would say is a normal fluctuation. But if we look at what researchers put in their publications, that 0.3 kilogram increase would likely go on month after month because of my diet. But would the gap in my leash continue to grow month after month as well? The math there just isn't mathing. Van Tulleken did a bunch of lab tests pre and post his month, and I did not. Honestly, I'm glad I didn't do the lab tests. In all of the commentary by Van Tulleken and others, including Lustig, the hypothesis is that UPFs cause hormonal imbalance that makes us hungrier. They all spoke about the scary outcomes of never being full again, but I was fuller and I wasn't as hungry. So, regardless of what my hormones might be doing, their dramatic claims were not realized in my experience. And now we'll hear my interview and discussions with Amy about my experience. Amy, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be back.
Your episode has the second most listens on the podcast so far. It really hit home for a lot of people who became similarly confused, but also very aware that it was nothing, that all of this meant nothing. So thank you for that. And thank you for coming back to talk more about it.
You're welcome. Okay, so you ate ultra-processed foods for a month. What were the highlights of your ultra-processed month? What were the lowlights generally?
Yeah. I would say the highlights of my month are the Costco's pupusas. Let me tell you, I'm very excited about them. And finally trying Trader Joe's soy riso.
It's an amazing food.
I know. Like, people have talked about it for years, but I just had to get to a Trader Joe's. I also got to remember that our local store, Rancho San Miguel, has like a full Mexican food setup there. As far as other food bits, the lowlights would be Kevin's like ultra processed meals from Costco that actually needed me to add salt, which was very confusing. That was around week 3. And week 3 was like a real low in all of this. I was like, oh, I must be tired of ultra processed foods. Turns out it was just stuff that didn't taste good. So I was like on week 2 of meatballs from Costco and like Kevin's. And so back to your point, Amy, and something that you're always trying to convince me of. If it doesn't taste good, like I just don't want to eat it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I've told you multiple times, if it doesn't taste good, I'm just not going to eat it and I'll be hungry. And I know that like I need to eat, but it's simply not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Did it make eating easier or harder?
It was harder because I had to write shit down and like calculate what 80% was. And like week 1 in, I was like, this is the worst thing ever. For every eating disorder patient out there that's had to keep a food log, I'm sorry. But after that, like snacks and meals were great. I had all of my Costco food in the fridge or freezer for the entire month. I didn't have to grocery shop at all if I didn't want to for those meals. So that was amazing. And I was complaining like not at all about having to figure out what to eat, which is something that I do on the regular.
What types of food were you typically eating before this month?
All right. So again, Amy, you and I have talked about food a lot. You are one of my food friends. You enjoy cooking and making these for people. I, on the other hand, just enjoy eating your food. So I mentioned on Instagram that I would just pull out like canned garbanzo beans, put like spices and avocado and hot sauce on it because I had like 5 minutes to make a decision about what to eat. I had eggs multiple times a day because, again, didn't have to think about it. So that'd be multiple times. Oh, I would call a like spoon of peanut butter a snack if I was running back and forth between someplace, or just fruit. Again, like running back and forth between like meetings. But this time I'd sit down and put like ultra processed yogurt and granola together, and have something that I would recommend to another person. Was a lot of what happened. Like, I would actually recommend this meal. This is not silly. I had to post a lot of it to Instagram, which probably helped. Helped me make sure it looked like a meal, but highly recommend meals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Welcome to the right side of the story. So what did you expect the outcomes to be?
I really thought it was going to be neutral. If somebody, yes, had asked me, I thought I wouldn't see any impact. The drama in what people had been documenting, you know, their sleep, their anxiety, everything, they were just unhappy. I was like, this kind of sounds dramatic. And I've eaten like a variety of foods over a lot of time. I thought things were going to be the same. I sure didn't think that I was going to feel better and that I was going to complain less and get more adulting done in the evenings. That was wild. to me. I didn't know that that could be improved until I was eating more. Again, I wasn't eating like more larger volumes of food. I was just eating more foods that were processed.
Why do you think you did feel better?
So this one you might have to help me out with, Amy, from the science and processing portion, like part of it. I didn't really control for any variables other than like what I was putting in my mouth. So it could have been the additional additives for all I know. But my guess is that I had more readily absorbable calories, that I wasn't just moving a bunch of fiber through. So like in that can of garbanzo beans, there was, a lot of fiber, a lot of starch that I wasn't breaking down, and it was just like passing through. But in things that are more finely processed, there's, more things that are both bioavailable as far as nutrients, but also, more calories. And so if I were to guess, it was because of like more calories. And scientifically, it made sense. Like I was experiencing afternoon fatigue, crankiness overall. So, more calories makes sense that would solve that. What do you think about that part, Amy?
My reason is actually like not that scientific. One, I think it's like having hung out with you, like food is a big like stress and theme for you. Like you're always like thinking about like, what am I going to eat next? How am I going to get protein, fat, fiber, whatever. But if you don't have to think about it, like it just removes a layer of stress from your brain. So like, it makes sense that I think anxiety would go down. And two, and I'm going to keep harping on this point, I think it's like eating, like feeling joy when you eat, like food freaking tasting good. Like it's more enjoyable to eat when you're not like choking down bland garbanzo beans, right? And the week you felt the worst was the week that you had the crappiest meal.
Oh, look at that part. Because I did. So the food anxiety too, like one of my narratives around my friends or in my life is that I'm always hungry. And I really think I just was, because a snack was a fruit rather than, a part of a meal, and other stuff were snacks. So I've, again, not been always hungry this month, and nor have I been overly full. So that's interesting. Yes, there definitely was an anxiety of making sure that I had enough food so I didn't have a meltdown, because being overly hungry is not great. But what I think also happened for like Chris Van Teliken and other people was that you're right. Like the foods that they were eating, they didn't like. It did not taste good. I think he was eating a bunch of like microwave lasagnas that he didn't like, but was like committed to doing just for this experience. And that's just not super realistic for folks, and doesn't really encompass all that UPFs are.
Yeah, and I know you and I like texted a bit while you were doing this. Like I'd be like, I wonder how much of like my lunch is like UPF, and it like was rarely a ton, but then there'd be a day where I was like, I needed some tater dots tonight. Like I had a rough day at work. And so I think like finding the balance point between like, I think most people don't eat a diet that's 80% UPF. Like if you took like a bell curve, right? But like some UPFs aren't going to kill you. And I think just figuring out like what is realistic and like what is representative is also really important. Like I think the way that you eat is like more representative. Like, yeah, people need fast. I use those same pupusas. Like we have them for when I'm like, I'm not cooking dinner tonight. And they also taste good.
Yeah, they taste real good.
Yeah. They're also good for breakfast. Fry an egg, put it on top, a little hot sauce. Yeah.
I had eggs to everything. I love that. Had not thought about it.
Okay. Would you have done anything differently if you could do it all over again?
I would have had more variety in my meals rather than getting everything from Costco and having to eat it for a week. I would have tried a lot more things. And I don't know. What notes did you have on the stuff that I was eating, Amy?
I think most of it looked good. Again, I think like adding more variety, like I think it probably did just get pretty boring. Like, buying a Costco pack of something and eating it every day is rough. And then also just the ability to adapt, because I think sometimes like my body really does want like a salad. Like I'm just like, like a cold, crisp salad sounds really good. And sometimes tater tots sound good. And sometimes like pizza and a salad sound good. And so I think the hard part for you would have been like just not being able to respond to your body's need.
Yes. It's a good point. We had a bunch of fruit and I was like, one, I'm either gonna have to like count this. Like I don't want to count it versus like literally count. But then two, yeah, I could only eat 30% of my calories from like every extra thing. So that was, yes, also annoying.
What are you going to do going forward?
I could really see myself being lazy again, which is super unfortunate. Like as this week is ending, I'm like, I don't have to do this anymore. I can just count like a handful of almonds as a snack as I'm going back through. So I am kind of like nervous, worried, because I definitely need either these UPFs or to cook a bunch of food, and I'm just not going to cook a bunch of food. So like I have to put the thought into buying more UPFs and not just getting lazy, as that is my tendency.
What if you kick off the month going to Costco, buy a bunch of UPF snacks and stuff, have them on hand, but try it for like 2 weeks without logging. I think the logging is why it feels like work for you. Because like to me, I don't know, like it feels like the same amount of work. Like eating is sometimes hard. So I don't know.
Eating is sometimes hard. I think I'll go try a lot more of the individual meals and still have a good time.
Yeah.
But I need to focus more on my snacks.
Yeah.
And not just having it be a spoonful of peanut butter. Like instead of a spoonful of peanut butter, I was having like toast with peanut butter on it for, snacks or whatever, and still having to count the peanut butter, which was annoying. But yes, just eating more overall. And then asking my spouse, like, am I complaining? Am I cranky? Am I trying to nap in the afternoon? I think will be it.
Awesome.
So something that I wanted to bring up with you is that all of these guidelines and rules and everything, seem to be about helping the public. But it really brings up for me the Michael Pollans, the Dr. Oz's of the world that really seem to be making this about them, and even about Dr. Lustig from, last episode and a couple episodes before that, how all of a sudden, like, it seems like these guys are at the center of these conversations.
Yeah, I mean, these sorts of things are not usually in my zeitgeist, I guess. I became aware of Michael Pollan when I was working for a large food company in the Bay Area, and a couple people had read his book. I think it was In Defense of Food, and it inspired some projects for us to see how that would translate, to new products potentially. But a lot of it feels just like recycled information and just someone like really having like one really passionate opinion and driving it home. And even looking at someone like Dr. Oz, I feel like his opinion on like the right diet has evolved over time. I think it's just like very frustrating to follow, because I think, like the Dr. Oz's, the Michael Pollans of the world have access to like time and money and resources that I certainly do not. I won't speak for everyone listening to your podcast. And I think that they don't take into account the context of the everyman.
Of the everyman.
Or every woman.
No, I know. I think the everyman totally works, because this has all been, from what I know about them, definitely white men, but perhaps cis straight white men as well. And how easily they were able to catch attention, but also how they had the opportunity to do so, right? So two pieces. For Chris Van Tellegen, he had done podcasts and TV shows and like been profiled on BBC in the UK. His wife works for the Daily Mail, so getting his, book and excerpts in there were really easy. We're all familiar with Dr. Oz and his journey.
Yeah. And you and I were chatting about Michael J. Fox is the brother-in-law to Michael Pollan. And even though they haven't actually done promo together, that gives you access to rooms and spaces that the rest of us who might have different ideas about food or nutrition don't have access to.
Something that made the ultra processed food like next level was that it wasn't only like elitism. It was also, you have to cook it yourself. So it included anything that you're bringing home from the store. So whether or not it's coming from Whole Foods or wherever, like that was somebody else made it for you and it wasn't okay. So the additional labor that was actually required for this was like next level for me.
I think that's true. And I was thinking about this, and we haven't talked about this yet. It's really interesting because when food first was able to be bought at grocery stores, right? Like when like processed food or like food processing was rising as an industry, because we've always been processing stuff, like whether it is turning wheat into flour. It's just evolved. But a lot of it was about convenience. A lot of it was about like novelty, and it was really well regarded. Like frozen dinners for like, busy moms when moms first went back to work were really heralded as an like convenient option. Or like we don't have fresh produce in most of the country around, right? Like I work a lot with tomatoes. There is one tomato season a year for processing tomatoes. So you can only get them fresh during that season. But if you want to use whole peeled or diced tomatoes, they have to be canned. If you just stick tomatoes in your fridge, they'll go bad. And I feel like we've now like come almost full circle where it's like, yes, that's available, but like you shouldn't need to use it, even though people are working more. We know that. Making less money. We know that. So it's just interesting that these like inventions that were really important for safety reasons or convenience reasons are like being demonized now, when the reason we needed them in the first place have only been exacerbated.
Mm-hmm. You've got me thinking again, like, who is this for? Because it's supposed to be the public, like we'll put that in quotation marks. And then these researchers are talking about, poor people and what they need. And like, this cannot be like talking about ultra processed foods cannot be what the public actually needs, what you and I actually need in order to like, quote, be healthy or have mitochondrial fitness. So who do you think it's for in the end?
Honestly, like rich white people and like people that have 9-to-5 jobs, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and that don't have a lot of like extracurricular activities, for lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm.
There are some people where like their whole like hobby and their passions are taking care of their home and like making a home cooked dinner. And that's great. But like I'm really active in like various community groups or in my labor union, plus my job. And I like want to spend time with my wife occasionally.
Just occasionally.
Just occasionally.
I think this further serves to put like those who are rich and mostly white, like just like reinforcing their position, at the top of either the caste pyramid or in white supremacy, and like make them feel better about themselves, like again, by distinguishing themselves from other people who have to eat ultra processed foods. And yet that I think that is the rhetoric, while rich white people eat ultra processed foods all the time. So I'm like, really, who is this for? It's so confusing to me. And rich, white kids will eat Lunchables because that's what they'll eat. So what are we doing? It's really confusing to me.
The part to me that like when we would text about this, I would just always be like, this is just not a helpful framework for modern society. I think I said that like at some point I would like rage text that in all caps.
Yeah.
Because like no one exists in a bubble. Like at least looking at like my friends who have a variety of socioeconomic statuses, right? Who are variety of racial backgrounds, like no one eats like this and no one can. And we all appreciate like, yeah, I would love to like be able to go to the bakery, a couple times a week and get fresh bread. But like the closest bakery to me that has like actual like home baked fresh bread isn't walking distance. It's like biking distance, but it's not a cute bike ride. So then I would like have to drive, which is like kind of annoying. Also, like fresh bread doesn't stay good that long.
Yeah.
So you have to plan around it. Like it's just a lot more thought and hassle when I'm already trying to like make sure I eat enough, make sure I sleep enough, make sure I drink water, go to work.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about sleep last night and this morning because, there is, quote, research that not getting X amount of hours of sleep is supposedly like unhealthy. And it's, more cortisol and inflammation if we don't get enough sleep, on and on and on. But nobody's out there saying if you can't have good sleep, like don't sleep at all, which like So what is this all or nothing? It's weird for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's too much. I really feel.
I just don't think it's like useful or helpful. I think food is already so imbued with like morality, and people already feel bad when they like eat what they like versus what they're supposed to be eating. And like,
Yeah.
I think it just makes it harder. And I am of the opinion that as we are all living through late stage capitalism and, democracy's crumbling, like, do we need to make anything harder?
1000% agree. You and I have talked a bit about the race and class, like overtones and, like dog whistle of all of this. And now, have you had any thoughts about things that particularly stick out to you about all of this?
I think for like the class piece, which is of course tied to race, the implications of like potentially working shift work, like I said, or like multiple jobs, which is already shamed in this country. Right? We like don't exactly treat, poor people well as a nation. And I feel like this is just like a further way to shame them. I know one of the big conversations or like talking points that I've heard people say is, right, you shouldn't be able to use like food benefits for like junk food, quote unquote. But also, like sometimes, honestly, when you've had a really like long or bad day, all I want is like some tater tots.
Right.
Right? Like when I think it's ignoring the part that like sometimes, especially for people with like less means, food can be like one of the like cheaper or simpler joys that we can experience, right? And so like not everyone can afford to like fly and travel, but like, maybe you can buy yourself a treat, but now you have to feel bad about that treat because eating an ice cream bar is going to kill you.
Right. It's actually going to cause my mitochondria to be unfit.
Right.
Yes. For those who have seen Super Size Me, which was when Morgan Spurlock spent a month eating only McDonald's foods, the summary of that was basically like fast food is the demon, soda's going to kill all of us. And inherently, I cannot separate like our narrative about fast food from race and class. I was just talking to somebody from The Examination, a journalist who, put out a call for dietitians to have like bring feedback on the profession. And I said, like, you focusing on the marketing of fast food to Black and brown communities is actually not what we need. Like, what you're doing is making this about fast food and marketing, inherently tying it to Black and brown kids. What you're not doing is looking at the whys of all of this. Like, why are people eating fast food? And I just feel like we don't care about Black and brown kids, poor people in general, when we chalk up their health to whether or not they're eating fast food.
Well, and I think it's also frustrating when I hear people say, like, well, like anyone can grow a garden. I just feel like there's a lot of like, well, like you should take on like this onus, right? Like you shouldn't eat fast food. You should make it yourself. I've like made homemade burger patties before. Do they taste better? Yes. Are they annoying to make? Also, yes. People are always like, well, like just start by growing, like anyone can have a container garden. My wife and I are both very smart people. We are not able to grow a garden. We have like, I think we've yielded like 12 tomatoes since we've like lived in our house. And then there's also like an education piece. I know like my uncle runs a really cool nonprofit in New York. One of the things he talked about is that people don't always know how to like prepare fresh food. So like great, like everyone is now, let's say everyone has access to like organic kale. What do you do with it to make it taste good? Because people won't eat food that doesn't taste good. Like not everyone knows all of these things. And that information is not necessarily readily available. And so I think there's also an element of education that's missing. And it's just like further shaming people. Like we're all supposed to intuit like where to get it, what to do with it. It's supposed to taste amazing. And that's just not realistic or fair.
Yeah, I have 2 notes on that one. I too had a garden this year, and I regularly have, a garden, but because of the growing season, it was very wet and cold. Same with the 12 tomatoes, but also like 12,000 gallons of water. So like, yay, I love playing in the dirt, but those 12 tomatoes probably cost me like $50. ridiculous. And two, yes, on the education piece, and this is the part where, again, I think the Lustigs of the world just have no clue. I used to volunteer at a clinic, health clinic specifically, and there would be produce boxes from whatever grocery store. It'd be piled high from, floor to ceiling, and it'd be like spaghetti squash or like radicchio or, whatever this food was. And, kale would be there sometimes. But one, I personally I'm not going to make a spaghetti squash. Like, I'm not going to take home 5 and like make one this week. If I take one home, I'm lucky if I make it in the next 2 months. It just takes time. People need appliances for these things also. And also, they don't have a bunch of calories. So great. I'm glad you're eating. And you also have to eat a bunch of other stuff. So, like, the reality of these recommendations, it's so clear that it's more about these guys and their legacy and their research and getting together with people who share these philosophies and just talking about others as if they know nothing. It's wild. It's very sad to me.
I don't think anyone, right? If you talk to people that do eat a lot of UPFs in their regular diet, whatever those are, right? I don't think anyone's arguing that it wouldn't be better to have like freshly cooked, homemade, locally grown produce, but we have to have like the time and resources to do it. And so like, unless we can like fix that part, all of it to me is just like piling on another source of like stress.
Agree. Again, thanks so much to Amy for coming on the show and thinking through all of this with me. With the media narrative and research communities to continue to repackage the notion that processed food is bad and kale and quinoa are good, we'll continue to get nowhere with our nutrition policy. When we make everything an individual responsibility and tell people to just make better choices, we won't get any closer to equitable food access. Many people don't get to make choices. When the people who make policy consider themselves to be the experts of other people's experiences and consider the public to just be ignorant, we'll stay where we are. We continue to see how the American narratives of bootstrapping and rugged individualism continue to retain the status quo. Research and medicine also continue to uphold health as a moral imperative. Our longevity is an indicator of whether or not we're a good person. As I detailed in all of its absurdity in my book, when I attended the Healthy Kitchens, Healthy Lives conference in 2022, a weekend that paid homage to the godfather of nutrition, Walter Willett, the idea that we could kale and quinoa our way to societal superiority was front and center. The conference cost $1,000 to $1,500, including accommodations in Napa, California. We were told that the reason all of us well-off people should care about food security was because hungry kids become a drain on our healthcare system and aren't as productive as adults. Those were the reasons. Not because we care about the humanity of others, but because someone else's experience of income inequity and food apartheid have direct negative impacts on our lives. I hope that the same news outlets who were excited by Van Tulleken's experience are similarly interested in mine. It definitely wasn't sensational, but I think it's important. If I absorbed more energy from my food, it makes sense that I would have less fatigue and be less hungry. Bodies don't have calculators and aren't machines, but this time, at least in my case, the math seems to be mathing. Would I recommend this experiment to others? No. But it sure seems like I need to be taking the advice I give to everyone else in my life and eat more food. If I'm not experiencing peak metabolic health and we have no idea, I'm totally fine with that. Feeling better, having more energy, and especially being a better person to be around are totally worth whatever my insides are doing. That's one of the things I think gets lost in all of this. In the absence of the health and nutrition narratives, what do we want from our lives? Who do we want to be? Those are things I'll be exploring in further episodes. Thanks so much for everyone's interest and support of this project. Next week, we'll hear from another food friend, Allison, on how she's been making things awkward. The best way to support this show is to follow, subscribe, rate, review, and share it with a friend. Until next time, make it awkward. I'm Jessica Wilson, and you've been listening to Making It Awkward. This episode was sponsored by Sacramento Outboard Services and is a production of The Body Politic. The fantastic Jen Jacobs did the editing and mixing.